Good evening, everyone. All right, thank you for being here. A couple of quick notes. You are, of course, being recorded. Just so you know, the meeting is being live streamed. Please take the opportunity to silence your cell phones now if they are not already silenced or off. The individual committee meetings here tonight will, of course, be directed by their individual chairs, but please endeavor to keep your comments to the length of 3 minutes and begin with your name and the block of your residence for record-keeping purposes. With that, we will go to the roll call of members. Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Royo.
Here.
Ms. Bakay.
Here.
Mr. Kleckstein. Ms. Craig.
Here.
Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Ms. Walsh.
Here.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Here. Thank you. We go then to the approval of the March 1st committee meeting minutes. I'll hear a motion.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Council comments on the minutes. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Royo.
Aye.
Ms. Bakay.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Give me just a moment. We'll begin with the Personnel Committee. I'll ask Councilor Bakay to chair that this evening.
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, the Personnel Committee has 3 items to consider on the agenda. The first is the nomination of Jessica Klinker for appointment to the Board of Health. This is a new appointment, and we have reviewed this resume. Is Jessica here this evening? Jessica, would you like to take a few moments to address council and just tell us why you're seeking this position or why this is important to you? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Klinkner. I currently serve as the Manager of Community Health at Penn Medicine Lancaster General Health. I've been a public health professional for the past 17 years, and public health is my passion. It would be an honor to serve on the Board of Health, the City of Lancaster.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments from other members of this committee, Ms. Walsh, or other members of council? Hearing none, I will move that we take up this appointment at our next council meeting on April 12th.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda this evening is the nomination of Dr. Corey Fogelman for reappointment to the Board of Health. This is a reappointment, so Corey would not be required to be here, but is Corey here this evening? No, that's fine. We have reviewed this appointment, and this was recommended by Kim Whistler. Are there any other comments from the committee
No comment.
or the rest of council? Then I would make a motion to move this reappointment to full council on April 12th.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. And the third item on the Personnel Committee agenda this evening is the nomination of Charles Yo for appointment to the Building Code Board of Appeals. Is Mr. Yo here this evening? Hello, thank you for being here. If you could just take a moment to address council, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you'd like to serve.
Sure. Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Charles Yo. I've been a practicing architect for 20 years. I've owned my own practice for 10 years in the city of Lancaster here. I am passionate about architecture, and I've been involved in a lot of different building types, and therefore I feel like my ability to see different issues through building code would be of benefit to the city, and I appreciate the appointment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yo. And I appreciate, in all cases, residents who have professional backgrounds and not being involved in boards, commissions, and authorities. So thank you. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the committee?
No.
Or members of council? Hearing none, I would make a motion then to move this appointment to the first city council meeting this month on April 12th.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. Mr. President, that concludes the Personnel Committee.
Thank you very much, Councilor Bakay. We go then, right back to you, the Finance Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Finance Committee has one item on the agenda this evening. It is Resolution Number 36, 2022. It's a resolution authorizing the filing of an application for a grant to fund Phase 2 of our strategic planning process. The resolution allows the application for an amount of up to $200,000. And Mr. Hopkins, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thanks, Councilor Bakay. The only thing to add here is that the reason that we don't have a definitive amount in the resolution, this is really to cover 50% of the cost of the Strategic Management Planning Program as a Department of Community and Economic Development program that will cover 50% of costs related to certain engagements that fall under that program. In this case, what we're doing is we had PFM come in 2019, also under a first round of the Strategic Management Planning Program, to do a 5-year financial review of the city, management analysis, and some other related work. That program, or that engagement, ended in 2020 with a delivery of their report in 2021. This is now coming back and having PFM refresh that, both because of the changes that have happened in the economy over the last, locally in the last 2 years, but also because of the presence of ARPA funding. And so they're doing a refresh of that 5-year analysis, looking at and assisting Department of Public Works primarily in capital budget planning, looking specifically at water system finances, and then there is also a equity framework to the current engagement that we have with PFM. What we are waiting on is a proposal on a 5th part of that engagement, which will be related to doing return on investment analysis for various projects that we may undertake in the future. The current engagement that we have priced with PFM is for a total of $235,000. When we get the proposal from PFM for that last piece, the ROI calculation, that will be added on to that. The STAMP program itself, as I said, will cover 50% of the total project cost. So that's why we built in that. And also the STAMP program has a maximum allowable grant of $200,000.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Were there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Mayor.
Not a member of the committee, but thank you,
Please.
Councilor Bakay.
ahead.
Just to add that the presentation related to the draft findings from the first phase was presented in January of 2022. That listed a series of revenue enhancements and cost control measures, several of which we are pursuing, and one of those was related to capital planning. And we are embarking on a capital planning process that Director Campbell will be thrilled to walk you through. This is the first of its kind in the city in terms of its comprehensive approach across all of our utilities as well as general fund. And we're really excited to be able to have this because it's going to aid us in our long-term financial planning for the city of Lancaster in a way that we haven't had before.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions from members of council? Comments from the public? Hearing none, I will hear a motion to move this to full council on April 12th.
Motion to move to full council on April 12th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Hopkins and Mayor Sraji. That concludes the Finance Committee this evening.
Thank you, Councilor Bakay. We go then to Community Planning. Councilor Craig.
Thank you, Council President. The first item that community planning is now in order. And the first item that we have on the agenda is a review of the Historical Commission recommendation for the Stockyards Development Project. And to do the review, I'm not sure who's here to do it. I think that's going to be Douglas.
Hi, good evening, councilors. I'm Douglas Smith, Chief Planner for the city. I don't have a lot to say on this particular development. I'm happy to answer questions, but just wanted to let you know that I'm here to answer any questions or concerns you may have. I think you're aware that the council did recommend an approval for this unanimously with some conditions, and that includes preserving the oldest portion of the Stockyard Inn and moving it towards the streetscape on Marshall Street. I'm happy to address any other concerns you may have.
So, I do have one question. The part that's being preserved, do you know where it's going to be moved? How far it's going to be moved out?
Sure, I can make an attempt at that. I certainly know, but I also recognize that the architect and the developer and their land designer are in the room as well if there are more specific questions. But the proposed inn is proposed to be moved basically to the streetscape, the newly designed streetscape that would be along Marshall Ave. So the front of the building would be right there for the public to pass by and interact with. It is intended to be a private use space, more like a clubhouse for the residents of that particular development. But I'm sure that there may be opportunities for the public to interact with it as well. But I would defer further detail to the developer and his team.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Are there questions from members of the committee? Any questions from the public? Yeah, to the podium, please.
So I just have a quick question on this.
Do you want to state your name and your
Sorry,
street?
Dina Mayonis, East Chestnut Street. I'm curious to know if there will be a walking path from that development project to the city, regardless of the bridge that's there with the sidewalk, to give the residents an opportunity to walk rather than come in and park.
Okay. Will there direct that question to either Mr. Smith or one of the contractors or developers?
Excuse me, Ben Lesher, I'm the developer for the project. I'm not sure if I completely understood the question.
Is there going to be a path made from Stockyard in location to the city so we can alleviate the controversy that we already have?
There currently is a sidewalk that goes up over the Lidditz Pike overpass. We're not planning on building a pedestrian walkway over the railroad tracks, if that's your question. We are considering and trying to talk to PennDOT Amtrak about maybe having a walkway under the Lidditz Pike overpass to connect into the eventual connection to the train station.
Thank you. Are there any further, that was a good question. Thank you. Are there any further questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll hear a motion.
Motion to move this to full council?
He's not here. Okay, I second that. And all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Our next item on the agenda is resolution number 7, amending the sewer control plan for Queen Street, Chestnut Street Apartments project. And again, I believe that's Mr. Smith.
Since I'll be here for the next few items, I thought I would just take my seat here.
Well, you're very welcome.
So the sewer control plan, we've discussed these before with City Council. This is a perfunctory approval that's required by the State Department of Environmental Protection. And the City of Lancaster is, our duty is to assure that this project is in accordance with our zoning ordinance, our land development ordinance, our comprehensive plan, and primarily to ensure that we have sewer capacity to accommodate the development. As is typical, this has been reviewed by myself and especially our water and sewer utility engineers, and they have determined that capacity is available for this project, and they've submitted their analysis and recommendation for adoption for this. That same explanation applies to the next agenda item as well. So just wanted to provide that background, and please let me know if you have any questions about that.
I don't have any questions about, I mean, we do these sewer amendments quite often for different projects, and the purpose of them, I understand, is to make sure we have capacity so that we don't have for health hazards and bad water going into the rivers and streams and things like that. So I don't have any other questions for that. And are there any questions from members of the committee? No? Any other questions from council as a whole? Questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll hear a motion.
A motion to move resolution number 37, 2022 to full council.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and the next item that we have on the agenda is very similar, probably with this, almost the same explanation, is Resolution 39, amending the sewer control plan for the HDC Mid-Atlantic College Avenue project.
I don't have too much more to add here. This is, of course, you named the project. This is for 64 units. The last one was for 142, so less than half of the last project. This as well has been evaluated by our utility engineers and recommended for approval. This project is going to be entering the land development phase in the very near future. At the moment, no full land development plan has been submitted, but we have reviewed a sketch plan, and the Historical Commission has reviewed a conceptual plan for this as well.
Thank you. You know, and the same thing applies to this. It's just to make sure that there is sewer capacity, that we don't have health hazards and sewer overruns to the rivers and streams and so on and so forth.
That is correct, Counselor, and I'll add to that. These reviews are primarily to address issues of on-lot sewer or developments that are actually providing their own sewer facilities. In our case, in an urban area where we have a city sewer system, these reviews are very perfunctory and administrative, and there are no, capacity concerns in this particular area of the city.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee? No? Any questions from council as a whole? Questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll hear a motion.
Motion to move resolution number 39 to full council.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, now the next thing on our agenda is Administration Bill number 7, amending the zoning ordinance.
I believe that's me
And
again.
you're still here.
Thank you, and I'm going to invite our director, Chris Delfs, up as well to accompany me. I'm going to work to connect my computer for a brief presentation, and I'll give me one moment here. There we go. So the next three items I'm going to be addressing, Administration Bill 7, 8, and 9. I'm just going to address 7 to begin, and then 8 and 9 are a pair, so I'll deal with those afterwards, and please just interrupt me as you need. And Chris, did you want to offer any context to this to begin, or I'm happy to just jump right in as well if you'd like.
I know we've got a long night, so we'll jump right in. I'm here just to help answer any overarching policy questions with regards to the zoning ordinance, especially this first part here. So let me know if you need me.
All right, thanks, Chris. So as I mentioned, I'll be starting just with the amending the zoning ordinance. That's Bill number 7. And then I'll address the wireless communication afterwards. So just a note on the process to begin. The Municipal Planning Code is the state law that governs the amendment process for zoning. So we've been adhering to that process, and that requires a Planning Commission recommendation. That Planning Commission recommendation actually occurred over the course of 5 public meetings between January 19th and March 16th. In addition to that, I personally convened 2 subcommittee meetings with members of the Planning Commission. We are lucky enough to have 11 very engaged Planning Commission members who are all residents of the city. And they were very invested in these amendments and making sure that we got them right, which is why it took 5 public meetings. And I want to acknowledge their support and input into this process. In addition to this, city staff convened a listening session on short-term rentals with a group of about 8 residents that had submitted concerns to the Planning Bureau directly about short-term rental expansion in the city over the last couple of years. So in addition to the Planning Commission review and recommendation, it's also required that the Lancaster County Planning Commission review the proposed ordinance. They will be doing so on the 25th of this month. So I will have the recommendation in hand for the council meeting that we're recommending occur on the 26th for a first reading. And then finally, City Council is to have a first reading public hearing and a second reading. And that public hearing is part of the requirement of the MPC and requires a court stenographer to be present to record the record. So jumping into our policy goals, I broke them down into 4 overarching goals. The first one is to increase opportunities for housing in the city. I'm sure you're well aware of the housing challenges that we have in the city and the nation. We have heard from residents through the ARPA engagement and through our comprehensive plan engagement that creating housing opportunity is the absolute #1 priority for the residents of the city. So we wanted to make headway there. The second issue is creating a mixed-use and walkable urban environment. This is one of the things that makes Lancaster a charming and livable community, and I'll say more about that in a moment. Third goal is to update our short-term rental regulations, and finally, to correct technical issues. So I'll jump into the first one. There were 3 things that we have proposed in this ordinance. One is to allow new multifamily construction in the R4 and MU district by right. Currently, there are only 2 zoning districts that permit new multifamily in the city, and that's in the downtown, CV and CV1. Clearly, we need more new multifamily in the city, and so that comes with expanding the by right use in our zoning districts. So R4 and MU are characterized by dense residential. The second one is to allow non-family rentals in the R3 district without owner occupant. This gets a little wonky, but we know that there are a lot of adults who are living together in the same house that are unrelated, who are trying to make a go at it and make a living. And so this proposal is really to bring our zoning ordinance in line with the reality of how some people are living in the R3 district, which is still a dense residential neighborhood in the city. So this would allow 3 unrelated adults to live within one unit. Third one is to allow conversion of rear structures to single-family units. This happens all the time across the city: carriage houses, garages, industrial buildings. We want to make sure that they're also permitted to be single-family units. Right now, every other residential type except single-family is listed, and I think this was an omission in the past. Second goal for mixed-use and walkable environment. We did a couple of things here. One is to limit lots used exclusively for parking, especially in the downtown. We don't want our lots to be parking lots in the downtown and not have the highest and best use possible in creating a walkable environment. So we've limited that in the downtown and required a special exception for parking exclusive lots across the city. Second one is to adjust building height for ground floor commercial. When you have ground floor commercial and mixed-use projects, the buildings tend to be a little higher. The third was prompted by a church request at the zoning hearing board, and this is to exempt wheelchair lifts from dimensional requirements so that we can continue to provide for an accessible urban environment. Third goal, to update short-term rental regulations. We are proposing to update the language from visitor house rental to short-term rental, which is a term that most people are familiar with. We get questions all the time about where our short-term rental regulations are. We also are proposing to limit short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods. Thirdly, updating the parking requirements, especially for large short-term rentals that have 4 or more bedrooms in the units. Fourth is to address homestays, which is a situation where short-term rental may only be a bedroom. Say you own the house and you want to rent a bedroom. That has not been explicitly addressed in the zoning ordinance, and we would like to allow for that, but also regulate it properly and apply parking requirements in some cases. The fourth is just to correct technical issues. There isn't a whole lot to say about that, but I'm happy to get into the weeds if you'd like. Some of these were just errors that are in the zoning text. In other cases, it's to improve the process of land development between zoning and the SALDO. Happy to answer any questions on that. That completes the overview of the zoning amendments. Thank you very much. I'll take questions.
Yeah, I don't have any questions at the moment, but that doesn't mean that one won't come later. Are there any questions from the committee?
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Thank you, Mr. Smith, for the presentation. Regarding the limit of short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods, what is the process and how would that be limited?
Sure. So at the moment, short-term rentals are allowed in the R3 and R4 districts, among other districts. The R3 and R4 primarily covers most of our neighborhoods in the 4 square miles of the city. These are the neighborhoods we might think of as, SOE or the Southeast or Churchtown or other neighborhoods. So we've been hearing from many residents that there is a proliferation of speculative investment and purchasing of these houses. We thought that it was prudent to recommend removing short-term rentals by right from both the R3 and R4 districts. So this would limit their availability primarily to commercial districts, especially the downtown, CB and CB1, the mixed-use district, and the other smaller commercial districts, C1, C2, which are kind of peppered through the city at key intersections where you think of bodegas or corner stores being. So the neighborhoods that you and me are all familiar with would primarily be off limit to purchasing full houses and flipping them into short-term rentals.
And a follow-up question to that, what happens to any existing short-term rentals that are currently on the market?
Short-term rentals that are in accordance with our current zoning ordinance would be grandfathered in as uses, and that is well established in state law in Pennsylvania, and so that would need to be honored. But going forward, there would be a new ordinance if this were to pass that would be applied to any new applications or non-conforming units.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So, Mr. Smith, could you we'll go over the section for the downtown areas just once more? I kind of feel like I'm missing something.
For the short-term rentals, Counselor?
Yes.
Sure. So what's being proposed is that short-term rentals no longer be allowed in the R3 and R4 districts, but still remain as by right uses in the downtown districts, CB and CB1, and also in the mixed-use district, and also the RO district. And I'm happy to pull up a map if you would like to look at these. And then C1 and C2. So All of those are where they are currently allowed, except for the R3 and R4 is being proposed to be removed from that list.
Douglas, I think it would be good to show the map, if you don't mind. You can rattle those off so quickly, and
Yeah.
I think the public would benefit from a review.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll do that.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay.
But remain allowable in like the downtown,
Mm-hmm.
where there's like a natural intersection of like commercial uses and residential.
Okay, so this is the city zoning map. The CB1 and CB are what many people think of as our downtown. So the short-term rentals are currently allowed here and are being proposed to remain there.
Okay.
In addition, the mixed-use district, which is in brown, so that's a large swath of the northwest that is kind of in transition, as well as the area that has been rezoned for St. Joseph's Hospital redevelopment. And there are some other industrial pockets throughout the city where mixed use is. The mixed use is really a redevelopment area of the city that is very much in transition of land, and some of which is, or much of which is along the former railroad and industrial corridor of the city. STRs, or short-term rentals, are also proposed to remain in the RO district, which is mostly around the hospital and the former St. Joe's Hospital. Then there are little splotches of purple that you see. Those are the this commercial districts, and I'm going to pull up a key so you can see here. So C1, C2, and just C1 and C2 is where they're currently allowed and are proposed to be allowed. So that would include sections of West King Street, where King and Orange kind of merge. Also parts of the Manor Ave corridor, where there's commercial, and parts of the South Duke Street where there's commercial too. So that's more of a residential commercial district. So those are the areas where they're proposed to be permitted or continue to be permitted. The R3, as you see, is a light yellow, is a large area of the city residential neighborhoods characterized primarily by row homes, and the R4, which tends to be a little bit denser and spans our east-west and north-south corridors through the city. Those are proposed to be removed and no longer allow short-term rentals by right. I will add that homestays, though, in this ordinance are proposed to be permitted in the R3 and R4. And we didn't get into that too much, but really that requires a homeowner occupant. So if you own the single-family structure, then you can rent up to 2 bedrooms in that house. If you have a 5-bedroom place, it would not be permissible to rent all 4 or 5 bedrooms and continue to live there and manage it like a bed and breakfast or a hotel. That is going above and beyond and is really getting into a commercial use, which is what we're trying to discourage from the neighborhoods.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was most helpful. Are there any other questions from council?
Councilor Craig, I have one more question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Mr. Smith, regarding the allow conversion for rear structures for single-family units, can you just provide an example of what that would look like? Is that if I have a, garage in my backyard and want to convert it into a studio, I would now be allowed to do that? Is that what that means?
Yes, Counselor, I think you described that well. This provision was added a few years ago, actually, to encourage the reuse of historic structures in the city. we missed one thing, and that was adding single family as a use. Currently, 2 families, multifamilies are permitted for adaptive reuse of these structures, but many of them actually can't accommodate 2 or 3 or more units. So it's really more appropriate as a single family use. So this allows single family detached, semi-attached, and attached structures. So if there's a row of carriage houses along the back of your property, those could be converted into a single-family home. I will say that there are plenty of other challenges that come along with doing that, aside from the zoning ordinance, utility connections and stormwater, et cetera. But this would help in a small way to make sure that these structures are put to good use.
Thank you.
Douglas, are those also called accessory dwelling units? Or could you describe what the difference is?
Yes, this would be an example of an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU. There are lots of terms for these, and people define them in different ways, but this is, I think, a typical example where there's an out structure at the back of your building.
I'm making note of that because that was part of one of the 5 strategies in the interim housing strategy is related to ADUs as well.
Are there any further questions from council?
Would you mind going back to the zoning where you have the 4 changes listed? The first one, could you open up number 1 again with the increased opportunities?
Sure.
No, it was the second one with the create mixed use. I was just wondering if for the limit lots used exclusively for parking, can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. So currently in the downtown, surface parking lots are actually allowed by right. This, from a planner's perspective, is not a very good use of land where you're trying to encourage density and commercial activity. A key example of this would be the surface parking lot at Queen and Chestnut, which is currently up for development, and you just looked at the sewer module for that property. This could be held by a great building with commercial, on the first floor. So what we'd like to do is prevent additional lots from becoming surface parking lots in the central business districts. And in addition to that, there are some other areas of the city where parking, where it's a primary use, not an accessory use, but where you're taking a whole lot and making parking the primary use. There are other places in the city where that is allowed by right. For reasons of stormwater, for reasons of aesthetic and good land use, we've made all of them special exceptions. So it doesn't mean you can't get a parking lot installed, but it would need to be reviewed for certain quality of life issues like traffic and noise, glare, vibration, that it's not out of character with the neighborhood. I think we want to be thoughtful about where a primary use parking lot would go. This also applies to parking structures. They would be permitted in the central business district by special exception, unlike the parking surface lots. Parking decks have admittedly helped to create development in the downtown, and they can be paired with dense development. So those are allowed, those are proposed to be allowed as special exceptions. They're currently special exceptions, but continuing to allow them as such.
Thank you. And can we just go back to the first point again?
Sure.
Maybe it was more of the second, but in regards, you had mentioned parking requirements for either new building. Did I mishear that, or were you making any amended changes to parking requirements to either existing or new structures being built?
So parking requirements aren't changing except for short-term rentals and homestays.
Okay.
So currently, short-term rentals can have, in most cases, they provide no parking for up to 3 bedrooms because of the way grandfathering works. So a single-family unit is grandfathered in 1 parking space, and you can turn a 3-bedroom house into a short-term rental and not provide any parking, and you could have 6 adults living there for a week. When you get to 4 bedrooms, the zoning code requires 1 additional parking space, 4 or more bedrooms. So you could actually have a 10-unit short-term rental, and there are some that provide only 1 parking space. So what we've done is we're proposing to change this and match it with the number of bedrooms. So beyond 3 bedrooms, you have to provide 1 parking space for every bedroom. So if you have a 5-bedroom, you'd provide 1 for the first 3, and then you'd provide 2 more for the 4th and the 5th, and so on from there. So this ensures that there's not a parking crunch from short-term rentals operating throughout the city.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Any further questions from council? Questions from the public?
Hi, Dina Mayonis, East Chestnut Street. So we stated that the current R3, R4 homes that are Airbnb, we'll call it, are going to be grandfathered in to this?
Yes, if they're currently compliant with our zoning ordinance right now, then they would be grandfathered in.
And compliance means they have legally obtained a permit to do so.
Yes, so there are a couple caveats to that. Short-term rentals are permitted in those districts under certain conditions in the zoning ordinance. For instance, the biggest one is that they have a rental license to operate, just like any other rental unit in the city does. So that would be one of the conditions that would need to be met, in addition to others, in order for it to be a compliant structure. And that does require a letter of compliance from our zoning officer, saying that you've met the conditions and you're allowed to operate. So if, and I'm happy to review those conditions, with you in detail if you'd like to make sure of that.
Sure, I have a follow-up question to that.
Sure, please.
What are we doing about the Airbnb short-terms operating without permit right now in the city?
Yes.
Because there are far too many.
Yes, good question. And I had a backup slide I can go to just in case a question like this were to arise. Give me one moment to navigate to the end here. So the city has contracted with Granicus Host Compliance to monitor short-term rentals in the city. This is a third-party company that provides the service of identifying all of the short-term rentals that operate in the community and that are advertised on 80-plus different platforms. And it creates a condensed list and provides that to the city on an ongoing basis. And it also helps to monitor the activity that occurs at those and when they're booked. They are also offering a letter automation process, so it'll make it easier for staff to administer this. So going forward, that is how we plan to keep track of the short-term rentals occurring in the city. I will have that complete database available, so I'm told, by the April 26th City Council meeting, and I can have a more firm number for you. But I'll go through just a couple more data points here. So Granicus estimates that there are about 200 unique short-term rentals operating in the city, and they've estimated that there are 322 listings. So some of those are cross-listed on platforms. That is an estimate right now. They told me in 2019 there was 196, and I'm expecting that that number of 200 will likely be higher when I have the full inventory done. City planning currently has a record of 41 units that have obtained a letter of zoning compliance. I submitted a right to know to County Treasury, who provided me a record of an additional 29 units that have registered with them for tax purposes, and they were not registered with the city. Finally, I just want to draw attention to one of the reasons that we are going through this amendment process, and it's really to preserve housing for the residents of the city and the character of our neighborhood. I've pasted here an excerpt from an email that I got from a resident. This is a 79-unit multifamily building, and this was sent out by their management company saying that they were excited to announce that Airbnb is now offered as an amenity to all the residents of the building. This is not in compliance with our current zoning ordinance. It's not in compliance with the proposed zoning ordinance, but it goes to show you the scale of interest that is occurring across the city by property managers.
And I'll just add, Dina, that one of the things that we are also paying attention to in terms of the number of units is just that we have 14,000 14,700 licensed rental properties in the city, 14,700. And so when we look at this and we think about these 200 units, it feels like it's a lot, and it's also far less than 1% of our overall rental units. And so later on tonight, we're actually going to be talking about a lot of the work that we're doing around lead hazard and some of the process changes. And we have been given considerable focus to those 14,700 units. And now we are seeing the uptick of these short-term rental units and hearing from residents who have concerns about the ways in which these become kind of empty through the week, and then they're filled on the weekend, and then there's trash and noise complaints, parking complaints, things like that, that we need to address more specifically in advance of the comprehensive plan being complete. And so this is really an important interim step that if council were to take will help us advance some additional regulation related to short-term rentals, especially whole houses being converted into short-term rentals versus like a homestay in which somebody is supplementing their income with having a room that they're renting out on a regular basis. And so we understand that property taxes are what they are in the city of Lancaster, et cetera, and we want to afford individuals an opportunity to generate additional income from their properties within reason. And so these are some of the changes that the Planning Commission and others have been that Douglas referred to in terms of the series of meetings, bringing to council tonight for the beginning of a larger public conversation.
So if a resident submitted homes that are not permitted to do short-term rentals, what would the city do with that information? Would they act on it, or would they just turn a blind eye?
So now we have a more comprehensive listing of what those properties are, and through Granicus, and then we would basically, our zoning hearing officer, Mr. Thrash, would then review that against the list that we have, confirm whether or not we do in fact have a license for that property, and if we don't, then there would be an enforcement aspect to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just quickly add that you've put your finger on what has been a hot button issue nationally in the city planning and housing field for a long time, and understanding exactly where short-term rental are operating. It has been difficult for municipalities in recent years. So that's partly why we decided to, one of the main reasons why we decided to invest in this software. There are companies that have sprung up to help understand really how many are in the city. And as the mayor noted, this will help us with our enforcement practices.
And sorry, Dina. I just want to also add, we have one zoning officer. And so there have been complaints that we've received, and we've followed up on those complaints. And I also know that there has been frustration that we haven't been more proactive in doing this enforcement. What will happen now is that we have a list of a vetted list across platforms that's being provided to us on an ongoing basis in order for us to then proceed. So the time-saving element of that alone is going to really help Mr. Thrash in fulfilling these responsibilities, as well as all the other zoning responsibilities that he has. So I just want to contextualize in terms of our staffing capacity, what we're up against.
Sure.
Good evening, council members. My name is Mark Campbell. I'm a resident homeowner at 31 North Shippen Street in the R3 zone, and I appreciate the city's efforts to take a stab at dealing with short-term rentals. Two of them have sprung into existence in our block in the last 6 months, and if they have not been permitted already, I'm sure they're headed in that direction. So we appreciate, again, the opportunity that we have to take part in this process and see if we can get the short-term rentals eliminated as a permitted use in the R3 and R4 districts, where we've worked many years for a lot of people to make those good neighborhoods to live in. happy to answer any questions you have of me if you like.
I have no questions. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members and mayor. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Walt Rowan, and I am a resident of the city living at 24 North Shippen. I'm a neighbor of Mark's and live in an R3 district. I'd first like to say that I am very supportive of the effort to change the name of the vacation house rental to short-term rental. I'm supportive of changing it into a commercial services land use category. It's clearly commercial in nature. It's not residential. And it should be regulated much more like the B&B and hotel operation. I think that's very important to understand. Personally, my wife and I have traveled and utilized Airbnbs. We are not opposed to them. They're a great commercial use for property when properly zoned and properly regulated, and when the regulations that are in force are enforced. I am very supportive of removing the STRs from permitted by right in zoning districts R3 and R4. So going forward, I think that's a very smart move to do. I understand that it could be, by exception, allowed. And again, I don't think that's necessarily terrible. I do believe that the current, I believe that if current VHRs, so VHRs, vacation home rentals, are by use permitted in R3 and R4s, if they are grandfathered into R3 and R4s, that's fine, as long as they were done legally and correctly. The biggest question that I have, which goes back to some definitions that I think are not clearly spelled out, the VHRs currently say that they have to be a single-family structure and rented as a unit. By definition, that means that somebody can buy a single-family structure and then rent that structure. And the structure is defined to occupy certain numbers of people by bedrooms. The other problem that brings up is, how do you define bedrooms? And if you understand and follow how Airbnbs are marketed, they're not necessarily marketed by bedrooms, they're marketed by beds. So you can have a single bedroom unit with a pull-out sofa in the living room, and when marketed, that's marketed for 4 people, 4 adults. And currently, and I understand that this amendment is modifying the current ordinance, but the current ordinance describes that the occupancy is by bedroom, which I don't believe corresponds to the way those units are marketed. So it's a conflict. I fully appreciate and accept that current existing short-term rentals that were properly licensed and regulated should be grandfathered in. I have no problem with that. But I do have a problem with the idea that, as we just heard from statistics, that the city only understands that 41 units are currently registered. And we all know that there's a lot more than that. So if there's a grandfathering clause, which, once again, I believe there should be, you must have enforcement to make sure that if they were not properly licensed, and they were not properly put into play, that they lose their grandfathered capabilities.
Thank you.
I have one final quick thing, which is that when you talk about a single-family unit, I will guarantee you that a lot of the Airbnbs that are out there today have taken a single-family unit and made it into a two-unit structure. So I think when you're talking about grandfathering and enforcing, you need to understand and figure out how to handle that, because that is an issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Council President.
Thank you, Councilor Craig. Douglas, just so I have the fullest understanding, what Granicus host compliance, is that the full name of the? We're just going to call it Granicus.
Sure,
Great.
that works.
They'll provide this information to us in an ongoing rolling fashion such that here's what I'm imagining, and tell me if anything that I'm describing doesn't work or can't happen. Council passes this ordinance in the future. Some portion of the 130 short-term rentals, the 130 or so short-term rentals that we do not have record of are found to be unlicensed in the R3 and R4. An enforcement practice takes place, and they're told they can no longer operate as such in R3 and R4. Is part of the planned use of the Granicus software that we could then follow up and say, okay, 3 months on, is there still a current listing here? Can we take further enforcement steps? Is that, I want to make sure I have the correct understanding top to bottom.
Yes, absolutely. And we would get alerts when that unit and any unit is contracted and someone actually rents it. So we have purchased the monitoring component, so we know how many people are planned to stay there. You know, all of that information that you fill out as you rent a short-term rental,
Right.
length of stay included.
And then as we become aware of them, if I may.
Okay.
And then as we become aware of them, to Mr. Rowan, I believe it was,
Yes.
point, so as we become aware of, my imagination is that there's some portion of them that not only do we not know that they're short-term rentals, they're probably not licensed as rentals at all. And so I just want to clarify that there will also be enforcement of other existing rental ordinance and zoning code. So if, for example, you have a place that has 1 bedroom and 2 pull-out couches that ostensibly sleeps 6 people, where that is not otherwise in compliance with city rental housing code, that would be part of the enforcement. Is that, I'm sorry, that's a lot.
Yes, I think I understand. I think I understand the question. I
Yeah.
may have to follow up on some of the nuances, but I can say, big picture, our team within the department has been working together on the development of this ordinance change. Our bureau chief for housing, property maintenance and housing inspections has been involved as well, understanding that these kind of go hand in hand to ensure that we're also covering the rental license side of the equation as well. So, big picture answer to your question, yes. I may follow up on a couple other questions at a later time in terms of some of the nuances. Going
Right.
back to the mayor's comments before about capacity with regard to the zoning officer, et cetera, some of these situations can get pretty tricky, but I think working together, we'll be able to catch the lion's share of them.
Yeah, and I think thank you. And I think what I'm trying to get to the bottom of in particular is, actually there were some folks here that I had met with previously who raised both occupancy concerns and also concerns about safety requirements that we have for rental units that we don't have for owner-occupied structures, and making sure those are also applying going forward where we become aware of said rentals. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you, Councilor Craig.
Super. Any more questions from the public?
Tim Stuhlder, One United Lancaster. 2 questions. First, can you go a little more into the enforcement side? What might that look like?
Sure, I'll do my best. Now, we don't have full operation of the Granicus software at this point. So Granicus was a larger parent company that purchased Host Compliance. So I've put them both up here just in case you go searching for the software, you can find it. And they, in 2 weeks, will have a complete address identification. It's essentially operates like a map where you can go through the city and see all of the short-term rentals and their locations. And for each of those locations, we'll have some details about the particular short-term rental, and we'll be able to see the advertisement and the pictures on the various platforms and how many people they're saying can be housed there, et cetera. These units are identified by comparing the online photos of the unit with...
And if I may clarify, it was less identifying, but after you've identified and determined they're not compliance, how will you get them to stop?
Sure, understood. I'll just complete that thought so you understand that we're sure about the locations, and then I'll tell you about the enforcement side. So they're compared with long-term real estate listings for all these properties, and there are a team of people that actually go through and visually compare these to confirm the addresses. So once that has been done, then we have an automated letter system that we're setting up with Granicus. We've provided them templates for notice of violation and cease and desist. And with a push of a button, we will be able to send these letters out. The Granicus helps us customize the letter to that particular address and notifies them that they're not in compliance with the zoning ordinance. Typically, there's a notice of violation that's issued first, and there's a period of time in which they're supposed to contact us so they can address the concern. If that's not done, then there's a cease and desist letter, and if it continues, of course, it can eventually, move into enforcement within the courts.
Okay. And with respect to the ADU liberalization, I think in 2019 was when we initially began allowing them. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the ordinance underperformed in terms of generating additional living capacity owing to issues elsewhere in the code. So has the department looked at that, and do you have any conjectures about potential for additional dwelling units as a result of this change?
Sure. This is a hot planning topic. Chris may have something to add to this. ADUs are a part of a larger housing strategy. They often get a lot of attention, but they may not be the silver bullet that some people think that they are. ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, have not been named that in our zoning ordinance, but they've been permitted in our zoning ordinance for much longer, far before 2019. In 2019, you may be thinking of an amendment, and good memory, where we exempted some of those conversions from dimensional requirements to further facilitate their conversion from, say, a garage to a single-family home. We have not seen many of those, and there I think are a number of reasons. Probably top among them is access to utilities. Some of these exist along common alleys, and safe ingress and egress to the property is another top concern. As you might know, common alleys are not regulated by the city, and we want to make sure that if we start densifying these rear alleyways, that there's adequate public safety access to these structures. So those are two of the issues that I think remain for why they haven't expanded as much.
I can add to that briefly, just drawing on some experience from my past life as well. I would echo what Douglas said about the utility and infrastructure costs in particular. That tends to be one of the major constraints on development of ADUs. Also, we can make changes in the zoning code to help with some of the dimensions. Where we have a little bit more difficulty is with the building code, where we don't have as much flexibility. I would say here in Lancaster City, you maybe have not seen as many developments of ADUs because of the cost to do so. So the permission is there, but the funding may not be there for a particular property owner. So it does beg the question that, with some creative thinking or funding in that direction, then maybe that would prime the pump for additional ADUs.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Douglas, would you want this moved to the 26th for first reading?
Yes, that would be my recommendation. By that date, I will have the Lancaster County Planning Commission recommendation on the ordinance, which is a requirement, and we'll also have the address identification operational from Granicus.
Perfect. So, I'll hear a motion.
I'll motion to move bill number 7 to full council.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
On the 26th
Yes.
for first reading, right?
Yes, Counselor, and there will also be a public hearing that's recommended to happen on, at the first reading.
Okay. Thank you. All right, so the next item that we have on the agenda is Resolution number 8, amending the wireless communications ordinance. Mr. Smith, you are up again.
Okay, that's me again. So wireless communications, there was a state bill that was passed, bill number 1621, and this is to ensure federal consistency with federal regulation around wireless communications. This is primarily in regards to the expansion of 5G and other wireless technologies that are happening all around the country. And the state adopted new legislation, and now the city of Lancaster has to come into compliance with that state bill. Our communications legal counsel encouraged an ordinance update, and they provided city staff a draft of that. And there are two bills here that I will address together because it's kind of hard to separate them out in explanation. Bill number 8 deals with private property through our zoning ordinance, and bill number 9 deals with the public right-of-way through our rights-of-way ordinance. One of the requirements of the state bill was that zoning could not regulate the public right-of-way. So right now, our wireless facilities for public rights-of-way actually exists within our zoning ordinance, and we're no longer allowed to do that. There are also other federal regulations that have changed around timings of approvals that we're bound to follow. So really, we're enacting most of what we're being told to and don't have much of a choice otherwise. There are a few other details to add to that, but that's the general reason why we're going through this process.
So the ordinance, the bill separates the right-of-way from zoning.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and what has been determined is that city government has very, very limited purview for denying a wireless facility in the public right-of-way. So if a company approaches us and wants to put a wireless facility on a telephone pole or a pole that we own, in most cases, we can't say no. But there are certain guidelines in which they are permitted to install that. First, they have to see whether they can co-locate on a nearby pole where they already have a facility. And if that doesn't work, then there are certain guidelines that they have to follow in terms of what it looks like and like stealth technologies in some cases, so that they don't become an aesthetic nuisance throughout the city. But unfortunately, we have very limited powers in the rights of way. When it comes to private property, we have a lot more power to regulate where they go. In most cases, these are very small facilities, but in some cases, they can be more substantial. So when it comes to really either of these ordinances, we try to create some aesthetic guidelines so that they don't mar, our city.
If I could just add, Councillor Craig, this has been, this legislation has been in the process for approximately 3 years, and the Pennsylvania Municipal League and its membership have been advocating with the Cohen Law Group as the lead to facilitate limitations on these wireless facilities. You don't see very many around the city, but it is expected you will see many more. They look like small refrigerators hanging off of telephone poles. There's one in particular on Plum Street that's very visible. And the concern for cities like Lancaster, and really any city, is with our historical character, that having these structures where they could literally have put them anywhere, they could install poles, new poles that would be as tall as they wanted them to be. There were no limitations. So we've gone from no limitations to very narrow set of limitations, and I am pleased that we're moving this forward, because we have to protect as much as we possibly can, and the guideposts in this way are very limited, but there are some. And so in order for us to be able to enact any kind of regulation for these wireless facilities, this in fact is our only opportunity per state legislation.
Perfect.
I'll just say a couple other things. I don't have too much to say on this topic because it gets kind of wonky. But our policy goals were to reasonably provide for wireless communications, maximize local control within those narrow guideposts that the mayor mentioned, separate the regulation, as I mentioned, from private and public property, and then finally to create regulations and a design guide to preserve aesthetic and historic character. So these would not be permitted on buildings on the National Register, for instance, on private property.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee? No? Questions from council? Questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll hear a motion.
I'll motion to move bill number 8 to full council.
And I'm sorry, Douglas, it's a bill, so when would you want that? On the 26th?
Yes.
To full council on the 26th.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is bill number 9, but do we need, or is it necessary to add to that because it's so similar in context with 8?
So this is the rights of way portion.
Right.
So there are two related ordinances that are being proposed. And I spoke to this one in all of the comments that I made.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to make a motion, or I'll hear a motion to move 9 as well.
I'll motion to move bill number 9 to full council on the 26th.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So the next item on the agenda is Administration Bill number 6, amending the lead hazard ordinance. Are you leaving now, Douglas? You've been here for so long. Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Craig. Good evening, councilors, mayor. This ordinance proposal tonight is one of the ways we are looking to ensure safe and healthy housing in the city, and it's part of a wider initiative. Really, we're looking to ensure safe and healthy housing. Mayor, thank you for your leadership to prevent lead poisoning in our city for our children. It's really been an honor to work with you on this initiative. And I also want to express my thanks to our many staff members who have provided their invaluable expertise and recommendations in the development of this ordinance. And also thank you to the many community members, community stakeholders, child care facility owners, landlords, partner organizations who have contributed valuable feedback to this ordinance development. Okay, look at that. So we have discussed lead poisoning in children at many council meetings over the past several months. And so I just want to take a very brief minute to review why we are proposing these changes. There's no safe level of lead exposure in children. And exposure to lead among children can seriously harm a child's health and can cause permanent, lifelong damage. And these negative health effects have no cure and are not reversible. And some of these adverse effects are listed here on this slide. This is a slide, again, we've been over before, but I think it's worth it to point back to the children that we are serving. So this process, again, has been a robust community engagement process. We have provided a lot of information and spent time communicating with the stakeholders and listening to feedback, and have gotten a lot of fantastic ideas coming directly from the community. And at this point, we're really confident that we've met our goals of protecting children in the most effective and efficient way possible through this final draft. So very pleased to be bringing this to you this evening. So the first part of the ordinance is expanding requirements for lead safety. This is found on Article 3. You do have the entire ordinance in front of you, or the entire law, but this section is Article 3 is really one of the major changes, starting on page 7. So we have added some flexibility in this final version, where landlords, first of all rental properties built before 1978 will need to ensure that they are lead safe. And there are two options for this within the ordinance. First, landlords can choose to have a lead hazard evaluation by a city housing inspector at the time of the initial and systematic rental inspections. This is the times when the housing inspectors are going into the homes already to do the rental inspections. If they pass that, they would be receiving a notice of compliance with lead safe standard from the housing inspectors. They can also choose instead to have a clearance examination by a private lead risk assessor within 30 days from the expiration date of the previous lead safe certification. This would be required every 2 years and would result in the lead safe certification. This process mirrors what we're currently doing and requiring for properties with kids 6 and under in them, so landlords can continue to follow that process if they would prefer to do that over using the process that we can build into the systematic inspection. If they do not pass the lead hazard evaluation by the city housing inspector, that will bump them into the requirement for a lead clearance examination by a private lead risk assessor. So we will go in once, if they pass, then they will get that notice of compliance until their next systematic inspection. If they do not pass, then they'll need to follow up themselves with a private lead risk assessor. We have talked extensively about the criteria to pass the lead hazard evaluation by the housing inspector to make it efficient, effective, and cost-effective for the city and for landlords. And these will be established in policies and procedures prior to January of 2023, and will come back to council in a resolution adopting those standards. Some of them include windows and casing replaced, no evidence of chipping and peeling paint, no evidence of friction on doors, or no bare soil or construction debris on the property. So those are some of the criteria that would be required, but those will be very in detail spelled out in policies and procedures. The second way we're expanding requirements for lead safety is to require all childcare facilities built before 1978 to follow that second pathway of having a clearance examination by a private lead risk assessor. We are not currently conducting any inspections on a regular basis for childcare facilities, so option number 1 would not be an option for childcare facilities. And they do need to provide that lead safe certification to our health officer every 2 years. And finally, we've been working with Lancaster City Housing Authority very extensively on what they are currently required to do and how we can ensure lead safety for those properties. And what we are asking of Lancaster City Housing Authority is to demonstrate compliance with the HUD's existing lead-safe housing rule. So they do have federal regulations that they have to follow, but we have not been coordinating with them to ensure that those properties are lead-safe. So when they can demonstrate that compliance to us, they will also receive a notice of compliance with lead-safe standards from the housing inspector. The second major part of this ordinance is strengthening the EBLL case response. So the first part of that is in Article 4, Section B, which is on page 9. So this reduces the amount of time for case response to better protect our children. The property owner is required to schedule an environmental investigation for the child within 5 calendar days, conduct that same environmental investigation within 10 days, and then submit a report documenting the results of the environmental investigation within 15 calendar days. These are shorter deadlines than are currently required in the ordinance, which is 21 days. In addition, we have added that the city may order an environmental investigation and bill the property owner if these steps are not met along the way, ensuring that we're not waiting until 3 weeks after the diagnosis of the child to begin taking action. The second major part of this part of the legislation is in Article 4, Section D, which is on the next page, page 10. And this gives health officers the explicit authority to issue an order of removal for the child. So this means that the child and at least one parent or guardian will be relocated at the expense of the landlord when they are indeed confirmed that they may be poisoned in their house, that their house is could be the source of poisoning, and also that their elevated blood level is very high, and the physician is recommending that they don't stay in that place. So this is really for the sickest children. The order is not removing the child from the family in any way, just requiring that they're not permitted to stay in the property that they are, where the lead poisoning is being caused. And they would be, you know, the parent and the guardian and the child would be removed from that home together. Those are really the two major components. And I just want to get back to this slide as well, the community resources. So we are increasing our standards to prevent lead poisoning and at the same time making big funds available to do the remediation in homes for low to moderate income households, both through our Lead Safe Lancaster HUD program as well as Lead Free Families with Lancaster General. And we have been working closely with Lancaster General on referral processes and working together with them. So we're very grateful for their partnership to make that possible. We have unprecedented resources right now. So the time to address lead poisoning is now in our community, and we have wide community commitment to do this. So my last slide is on next steps. A reminder that we're not proposing that this ordinance will go into effect until January of 2023. We have started to engage in an operational plan rollout for the next 7 months to provide education to the public and to key stakeholders and throughout the rest of the year. We are planning to bring the rental property ordinance, as we've been discussing, those changes to council in May. While they go hand in hand, we wanted to work at them bit by bit. It was a lot to bite off at one time. And I've attached the full draft for your review. Been all along providing this process where we welcome your feedback, your questions, and your ideas. So if you have anything between now and next council meeting, should we move this forward, I certainly welcome any feedback or questions you have related to the ordinance. And I can take your questions now or anytime after this as well. And thank you, Director Delfs, for being here as well. Really, we've all, as a team, been working hand in hand. Bureau Chief Craig Walt, Bureau Chief Kim Whistler here as well as James Nixon. So really appreciate everyone's collaboration and support.
Yeah, just wanted to echo a very, very quick thanks. This has been kind of an amazing team building exercise for the department as a whole. You can see members of our staff here today. Also want to extend a thanks to our amazing solicitor, Barry Handwerger, as well. There's really been so many pieces to this puzzle, and I think we've really ended up in a fantastic place where we are maximizing the safety standards for children and families and households within the city, but we also worked through an engagement process, including a couple of meetings with landlords where we made some changes so that the burden for property owners made more sense for them, and that it wasn't as stringent when it was not necessary, really concentrating our resources where they were most needed.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate all the effort that has been put into this. So, because it is so very, very, very important to protect our most valuable resource, our little people. So early on, you said that HDC has a state guideline that they have to follow, but they don't not necessarily align with what our guidelines are. So what are the difference? How does the local guidelines and the state guidelines kind of correlate? How are they different and the same?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this was Lancaster City Housing Authority because they receive HUD funds. It's the same governing body that's governing like our lead grant as well as Lancaster City Housing Authority. Through their federal grant, they're required to ensure lead safety every year through a lead inspection of some of their units, very similar to our requirements. I don't know all of the very detailed specifics of the federal regulations, although we have built our ordinance off of the federal HUD regulations, so very similar process and similar outcomes. However, they're already required to fill out specific paperwork ensuring lead safety federally, so we don't want to go in and duplicate services with our housing inspectors or have them have to do it in a separate way, in a separate process, but ultimately governed by the same rules.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, and then the other question that I had, a child is removed from the home, accompanied by an adult, and in no way taken away from their parent. The blood level of a child and the detection of lead in their place of residence, do they have to go hand in hand before a child is removed? Can they find that there's a detection of lead, but the blood level of lead in the child is not high? It's there, but it's not high in order for the child to be removed from that environment.
So we're currently proposing that the child is only removed if both the environmental investigation shows that the source may be in that house. So if they completely pass the lead clearance without that it's not pointing to that house, then we would have to go to other reasons, maybe in their childcare, hopefully not, or in a grandparent's home, or some other source. So they wouldn't be removed from that particular residence if that's not contributing, if it's determined that that is not contributing. Also, the blood lead level has to be at least 45, which is the point when they would undergo chelation treatment, and it's very, very dangerous for them to stay in the house during remediation efforts in particular, because their bodies process the lead even faster when they're getting treated for lead poisoning. So both of those in the current ordinance would be going hand in hand.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from the committee?
Just a comment, Councilor Craig. Just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and I'm always impressed with the intention you guys put behind these efforts, and also appreciate the intention behind the rollout of the actual bill if this were to move forward. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Are there questions from the rest of the council? Any questions from the public? Seeing none, I will hear a motion.
I'll motion to move bill number 6 to full council.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Council President, that concludes community planning for this evening.
Thank you, Councilor Craig, and thank you, Chris, thank you, Rebecca, your staff and team for all the work that you're doing on this. Council, if you will grant me just a little forbearance, what I would like to do now, as the folks from CASA have been dutifully waiting, is go ahead and open up the committee of the whole so that we can take on Council Resolution number 34, 2022, and then proceed, and then proceed from there. Council, would there be any objections if I did so? Okay, great. Then I will hereby open the committee of the whole, where we will begin with Council Resolution number 34, 2022, calling for Puerto Rican self-determination. I'll hear a motion.
Motion? Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. My understanding, this was brought forth to us by Councilor Diaz, please.
Yes, the reason why I brought this forward is there's a lot of, inner fighting in a way, to try to see if we can make Puerto Rico a state. Some basically want to make sure that Puerto Rico have their own decision on the self-determination of what the island is going through and be able to sustain themselves. We are always advocating for them because they pay property taxes, they pay federal taxes, but yet they're not able to vote for the president. And of course, after Maria, we have still deterioration. The electrical grid is still going on and off. People are continually getting bills when they don't even have electric. The water goes off, and I know that experience because I lived there a few years. So I'm here to forward it over to CASA because I think that they are also interested in knowing all across the nation on how we're trying to make Puerto Rico a better place for all of Puerto Ricans. And me, of course. ¿Quién quiere venir a hablar?
Todos ustedes quieren que hable en español, pero yo preferiría hablar en inglés para beneficio de los concejales que son los que van a votar. Okay? I'm telling them that although they will prefer Spanish, but for the benefit of the people that have the power in this room, that are you guys, so that you can vote. In difference to what Council Diaz is stating, that I appreciate that she brought the initiative, we can say that this project, it's a House Project 2070, is not guided exclusively for statehood. As a matter of fact, the importance of this project is that the positions that are colonial, we include, many of us, we understand that even the position of statehood is very colonial because it does not really acknowledge our nationality. And I'll tell you more, the situation that we are financially with the PROMESA law to cover all the expenses and the interest of the hedge funders of Wall Street is killing us for years, is something that is what they call an outrageous debt that never went into auditing. That's a good example on how we have been depleted from even the power that supposedly the law of 1952 for developing the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico was established, supposedly to have self-government and make the United Nations happy. In reality, nothing like that had happened. But because in Puerto Rico we have so much discussion for years and generations about what to do, this project tries to suit the following. It's a project where there will be establishment of, let's call it a discussion assembly in the legislature of Puerto Rico to look for different alternative of self-determination and to develop of how to implement that and then to consult in a bilateral way with a federal Senate and House of Representatives and to present to them the alternative that the people of Puerto Rico has, let's say, in referendum voted for. That can be independence, can be something like a real commonwealth that is not what we have now, could be an aspiration for statehood that I personally doubt legally and historically speaking will happen, but that's what this project comprehends, is never to go into automatic statehood. There's other project that promotes that. Doing that will keep us in a situation of colonialism. So in that sense, the project is more broader than just one alternative. It's a plethora of alternatives. And basically, that's what the project is. So if there's any question, I have a copy of the project with me, and I have a very nice summary in Spanish. I will have to translate as I go, but if any of you have any question, feel free to shoot.
Councilors, any questions for Mr. Diaz?
Just a comment, Council President, if I may.
Please.
Thank you, Councilor Diaz, for bringing this to council, and thank you, the members of CASA, for coming and presenting to us today. As a Puerto Rican and born in Puerto Rico, this is an issue that I feel personally, and also really understand that unfortunately, when you strip us the ability to make decisions or influence decisions that affect the island, strips us of our power and our identity, which I think Puerto Ricans have struggled with for decades on, how are we Americans if we don't have the influence to decide on decisions that affect our island? So I really appreciate you showing up today, and hopefully this resolution can echo a lot louder than just in Lancaster City. So thank you.
Thank you. I hope it's going to be like that because from a historical, anthropological standpoint, we are different. Always we have kept our nationality. We have struggled for that. We have suffered things like gag laws in the 1950s against using of our national flag. We are different people with a lot of assets. We have contributed to this nation a lot, from NASA engineers to cardiologists doing heart transplant with their eyes closed. But it's a matter of self-determination. It's not a matter of breaking relationship with a nation. It's to expand and change how we are doing those relations and how we do those relations with the rest of the world, because we have our own voice. It's not like the King of Spain said that in Puerto Rico was not Latin America. He was absolutely historically wrong. And I will have to say that to the king or to any other person. Thank you for the patience. Thank you, Council Lady Diaz. No sé si alguno de ustedes quiere plantear algo más.
Yo creo que Lourdes quería decir algo.
Tírale, Lourdes. ¿Cómo no? Y le traducimos también. You want me to translate?
Yeah. Está bien. Buenas noches a todos. Mi nombre es Lourdes García.
My name is Lourdes García.
Yo soy organizadora comunitaria de CASA en la ciudad de Lancaster, Pensilvania.
Yo soy un organizador. Oh, sorry. Community organizer of CASA in Lancaster.
En Pensilvania hay alrededor de 500,000 de boricuas que, al igual que yo,
In Pennsylvania, we have like 500,000 Boricuans as me,
que tuvimos que dejar nuestra nación e emigrar a este país que no es el nuestro.
that we have to migrate to this nation that is not ours.
Nosotros sufrimos el dolor
We suffer the pain,
que provoca la separación de nuestras familias,
the pain that causes the separation of our families.
además las carencias, limitaciones,
Besides the scarcities and limitations
dificultades que ellos padecen en Puerto Rico.
and the difficulties that they experience in Puerto Rico
Por su condición colonial.
due to their colonial condition.
Algunos puertorriqueños
Some Puerto Ricans
vinieron a Estados Unidos
came to the States
después del huracán María
after Hurricane Maria,
y otros mucho antes.
and many others much before.
Lo que allí se vive nos empuja a emigrar.
What we are living in the island pushes us to migrate.
Yo tengo a toda mi familia en Puerto Rico.
I have all my family in Puerto Rico.
Ellos han sufrido huracanes,
They have suffered hurricanes,
terremotos.
earthquakes.
Ahora también sufre todas las consecuencias
Now they suffer all the consequences
de las decisiones que ha tomado la Junta de Control
of
Fiscal
all the decisions taken by the Financial Control Bureau
contra los puertorriqueños.
against the Puerto Rican.
Yo, como madre,
Me as a mother,
boricua
Boricua,
y trabajadora,
and worker,
lucho para que se haga justicia
fight for obtaining justice
para nuestras familias que viven en Puerto Rico.
for our families in Puerto Rico.
El tema que hoy tratamos
The thing that we are bringing today
no debería de ser debate.
should not be a debate.
El tema que tratamos hoy
The thing that we are treating today
es un tema de derechos humanos.
is a theme of human rights.
El Congreso tiene la obligación
The Congress has the obligation,
de vincularse
the obligation to get involved with
y asumir su responsabilidad
assume its responsibility
ante los procesos
in front of the processes
descolonizadores
of decolonization
y de autodeterminación
and self-determination
que Puerto Rico reclama.
that Puerto Rico is claiming.
El tema que tratamos hoy
The thing that we are dealing with today
incluye por primera vez
includes by the first time
la vinculación
the connection
del Congreso de los Estados Unidos
of the U.S. Congress
al proceso
to the process
de autodeterminación
of determination
de mi país.
of the country.
Puerto Rico,
Puerto Rico,
que de una vez por todas
and one and for all,
los puertorriqueños
the Puerto Ricans in the island
puedan decidir
can decide
sobre su presente
about their presence
y su futuro.
and their future.
Que por todo eso
That for all this
es que junto con CASA
is that together with CASA,
apoyas que se apruebe
support that be approved
el HR 2070.
the HR 2070.
Thank you so much. Sí se puede.
Sí se puede.
Do you have any question?
Any questions for Ms. Garcia?
Gracias Lourdes y gracias Casa y Puerto Rico pa'lante.
Okay. Are there any other council comments? Any other comments or questions from the public? Oh, that's Mr. Jose Diaz.
Apologies. My name is Jose Diaz. I'm a member of CASA, and I live in Radio Heights. We're neighbors. Okay.
Anyone else? Okay. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baker.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Okay. Mil gracias a ustedes. Y'all are good to go or stay as you like, but thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Councilor Diaz. Give them just a moment. Yep. Okay, and that brings us. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that brings us to Council Resolution Number 35, 2022, recognizing Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. I'll hear a motion.
Motion to move this to full council on April 12th.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilor Beke.
Thank you. Please bear with me with my voice. It's allergy season. So April is nationally Sexual Assault Awareness Month, and this resolution I'm proud to bring forward as we have the countywide Sexual Assault Crisis Center right here in our city and the YWCA. And I've invited folks from the YWCA to our April 12th meeting in hopes that we will be moving this forward so that they can speak a little bit about the work that they do there, because this is so important. Just very quickly, in this resolution, it states how 1 in 5 women and 1 in 67 men, by the latest statistics, will experience rape at some point in their lives, and statistically overwhelming, they are young people. So it's important that we elevate this each year as this comes before us, and also recognize the folks in our community that are working to prevent and counsel folks that experience sexual assault, and also the things that we can do to make our community a more supportive place, and where sexual abuse and harassment and assault is not tolerated.
Thank you. Are there any council questions or comments? Or from the public? Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Beke.
Aye.
Ms. Craig.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
Ms. Walsh.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Thank you, Councilor Beke. Okay, that concludes the Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Council, for bearing with our little agenda switcheroo. We'll go then to the Public Safety Committee. Councilor Diaz.
The Public Safety Committee comes to order. The administration resolution number 38, 2022 is to adapt the emergency operation plan. And according to, give me just 1 second here, it's basically the 2022 emergency operation plan for the city of Lancaster is going to be updated every 2 years. And the adoption plan will follow updating emergency management coordination. And I don't know if anyone would like to speak on this.
Yes, if I could invite Jean Duncan to address council as our emergency operations coordinator. Mr. Duncan, this is a volunteer position that he serves in on behalf of the city of Lancaster, and is a tremendous resource to the city in a variety of emergency situations that we find ourselves in. I continue to be impressed that when I need something, it's pretty amazing that Jean can come up with it. So in the beginning of COVID, it was masks and sanitizer and all other cleaning supplies. But in other emergency situations, it could be anything from tents and other kinds of, I don't know, Jean, at the fire scenes, you bring food and blankets and.
You need it, I get it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so I just want to acknowledge that Jean is a really dedicated volunteer to the city, one of many. And in this role as the emergency operations coordinator, he keeps us on track in maintaining the currency of our plan. And Jean, if you can just talk a little briefly about it.
Sure. Thank you, first of all. Can you hear it now? Okay, good. The content of the plan is reviewed yearly and is updated every 2 years. And what has to happen is council has to pass it so that it can go to the county. The major reason that you're passing it and it's going to the county is so if there is a major emergency and there is federal funding for that, we fall in line to be able to get the funds. Aside from that, going through it every year and updating it lets us look at the trend of what's going on nationally and internationally. Believe it or not, most of the schooling we're going to right now is for cyber crimes, which most people think is a national problem, and it is, but it's also a local problem and can hit any one of us at any given time. So the fact that we're reviewing it yearly just brings us in compliance and brings us up to date with the current issues within the world. Now, I can answer any questions other than that, specific questions or whatever.
Mayor,
Sure.
this is just a scenario.
Mhm.
So we do know that there's a war overseas that has crushed me very severely in the images. So if something were to occur where there would be a war, let's say in the city, and something would, we already have a plan in place how to execute it, is that correct? I mean, I know LGH has their plan, but
I think that would
Yes
be.
and no.
Yes.
That's the far extreme, okay? In the event that someone would take out the water plant, we could handle that. In the event that someone could do something with the electric grid, we have plans for that. Civil unrest in a small scale, we have plans for that. An actual out-and-out war, we would help the citizens and we would do the best that we can, but that's something that is more of a federal, national and international type thing.
it always starts locally on exactly how to execute things versus starting to call in the military to get in here and start helping as well.
Believe me, we have a plan to handle just about everything and anything short of a large-scale war, yes, yes.
Thank you, Gene.
Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Any questions from other city council members? And the public? Then I guess we can move the resolution 34, 2022 to April 12th meeting.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. That's all I have for Public Works, for Safety Committee.
Thank you, Councilor Diaz. That brings us to the Economic Development Committee. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Council President. I have a brief update regarding the American Rescue Plan update. A committee made up of myself, city controller, and city staff interviewed top three compliance firms last week and unanimously chose a firm to support the city with compliance and reporting. The next steps include notifying all of those who submitted bids and finalizing the contract to kick off the engagement in the next few weeks. Their priority will be finalizing and releasing the housing RFP. In addition, the Lancaster County Redevelopment Authority, the lead entity of the Lancaster Home Consortium, and the City of Lancaster as a Home Consortium partner have just released a request for proposals for the Lancaster County Multifamily Rental and Single-Family Homeowner Occupied Affordable Housing Program. Applicants seeking home funds can be for a for-profit developer or a public or private non-profit entity. A letter of intent is due on April 11th of this year, and proposals are due on May 18th. This RFP is the first opportunity in a series for city affordable housing funds in 2022, and while separate, will be followed by the housing RFP we will release with support of this compliance firm once fully selected. So this information for this RFP can also be found on the county housing website at lchra.com. That concludes my update, and happy to answer any questions from council or the public. That concludes the agenda for the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. That leaves only the report of the city clerk, Mr. Harris.
Yes, Mr. President. In the last month, I've done various tasks, including writing the Puerto Rican self-determination resolution, which you recently reviewed. and I worked with Councilor Baike on the Sexual Assault Awareness Prevention Month resolution. I reviewed resolutions from 2011 and 2013 for a city staffer, supplied a copy of a resolution to an attorney, reviewed and supplied copies of ordinances for public works staff. I also reviewed 100 years of city council minutes to determine that this is the first majority female council in city history. Statements of financial interest. I continue to seek statements of financial interest, including from some people in this room, from city employees and also members of various boards, commissions, and authorities of the city in order to comply with the State Ethics Act. I attended the Parking Authority meeting last month, provide you a summary of that. I attended a virtual demonstration of meeting management software with our city's communications coordinator and began the process of looking at that with her. I reviewed draft board meeting minutes with another city staffer who is new to the position and supplied feedback on doing minutes. I supplied information that was requested regarding the city's Loop office and its predecessor, the Moose, and on the visitor center building that was requested. I added meetings to the city council chambers calendar at the request of a staffer, and under the watchful eye of the city's communications manager, I live streamed the March 22nd meeting and am live streaming this one. Concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. As always, we appreciate the work you do. Nothing we do could happen without you. Okay, that brings us to the end of our agenda, so I will hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone.
Oh, yeah, that's all.
Absolutely.
He came with his friends.
He's frazzled. Somebody ran into somebody on the phone.